Well, our good friend Carrie is out on a trip, but I have the great opportunity to fill in, and that is what I'm going to do. I have Francesca Montillo today. Look, have you ever sat at your desk and just dreamed of trading your corporate life away for pasta, passion, and passport stamps? Well, my guest today actually did it. On the verge of turning 40, she walked away from a highly successful career in healthcare management and then turned to her lifelong love of Italian food and culture into her full-time dream business, Lazy Italian Culinary Adventures. Today, Francesca Montillo is a culinary instructor, a boutique tour guide. She leads incredible slow travel experiences across Italy, and she's the best-selling author of the 5-ingredient Italian Cookbook. She's on a mission to prove that authentic cooking and travel should be simple and unhurried and packed with flavor. Brogan, what happened to your lips today? Let's get this show started.
Hi everyone, Tim Kitzer from NBA Jam and NFL Blitz, welcoming you to The Backpack Show. Your hosts, Chris Brogan, Carrie Gargone, Boom Shakalaka.
Backpack Show. I'm just going to bring Francesca right out here because, I don't have a co-host to do any fun banter with anyway. So you're part of the show, Francesca. Welcome aboard.
Thank you. Thank you so much again, Chris, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's a lot of fun to have you on now. I need to start at the start. I find that's like a boring way to do an interview, but this is a big transformation. You spent years working this really stable career. You were making transition towards 40. What was the tipping point? What made you say this is happening?
What made me say enough of this BS and do something else? Exactly the idea of turning 40. For me, that's what it was. I had worked in healthcare my entire life, practically out of high school, and then worked my way up. I eventually got a master's in healthcare administration. I don't know what I was thinking. And I was like, how did I fall into this field that I have no passion for, no love for? And I'm going to be 40. I was not married. I did not have kids. It was quote unquote easy for me to move to a field that didn't really require me to always be here in Boston. I was born in Italy. I loved traveling back. And one of the biggest aspects of traveling back, even when it was for vacation, was the food. And I loved cooking. So I said, how can I combine traveling and food in Italy and create a business out of it? And when I told people about it, they said, that sounds like a vacation, not a business. But I kept pushing it and pursued it on the side for a number of years until eventually I took it full time.
So you proved them wrong.
I proved
a
them
lot
wrong.
of people see that. They want to turn their passion project into something like a business, but they're paralyzed with fear. How do you help people, or how did you know when you could start turning from a side hustle to a full-time job?
I think one of the biggest things for me wasn't that I just walked into my boss one day and said, I'm done. It was that I did it on the side. So it wasn't so scary for me because if I failed, I still had a successful healthcare career. It wasn't something I was happy at, but I still had it. So I did it on the side. I was accruing a lot of vacation time, about 4 to 5 weeks a year at work. And I took that vacation time to run my tours. And my boss was aware of it. He was even supportive of it because, what we do on our vacation time is our business, not theirs. And I did that on the side for 2018 and 2019. It was a side gig, a side hustle. Then towards the very beginning of 2020, in January of 2020, I could definitely see that it could almost, if not fully, replace my salary. If I added just a few more tours, I could replace the salary from the healthcare to the trips. And in December of 2019, I gave my notice. I gave a 3 months notice. And then, because I had been there a number of years at this point, I needed to give an extensive notice. And then COVID hit. And yeah, I remember my boss coming to me in February of 2020 and saying, he was wonderful. He said, are you still planning on leaving? Are you still planning on traveling? And I was working in emergency medicine for Harvard Medical School at the time. I said, yeah, why wouldn't I be? He goes, because I don't think you're going to be traveling. I don't think anybody's going to be traveling for a while. So obviously he had some insight about what was coming down. And thankfully, he let me retract my. I hadn't found a replacement for me, and he allowed me to retract my resignation, and I stayed on in healthcare for 20 and 21 when we couldn't travel.
That timing is just crazy. And I've seen it happen in a bunch of other stories too, but just specifically travel adventure though, like you just walked right into it. That's pretty tricky.
Literally right as my business was taking off. But I have to admit, I used the COVID time really wisely, and I wrote 3 cookbooks. And that was my way of keeping myself relevant, or of keeping myself so that people wouldn't quote unquote forget about me and my existence. I taught a lot of Zoom cooking classes during that period. So I still, we couldn't travel, but I tried to find a way to bring Italy to people through cooking and through the cookbooks. Yeah.
The real quick tech thing. One thing I thought of to kind of help with the echo thing is if you hit mute, you're talking, that way it won't double.
So when I was
little microphone logo at the bottom, just hit that.
So when you're talking, hit mute. Okay.
And speaking of, you wrote 3 cookbooks. Now, the one thing I thought was kind of interesting about that is that you use the term lazy a lot in them. Lazy Italian Culinary Adventures, your cookbooks, everything has the word lazy. Talk a little bit more about the word lazy, why you chose it, and why we should all embrace being a little more lazy in the kitchen and also when we travel.
So I had this concept. I like the word, even though my business coach said nobody's going to want to associate with anybody who associates with quote unquote lazy. But I liked it because people always asked, where did this name come from? So people were remembering the name. And again, I was writing my cookbooks not for the Italians, but for the Americans, in the sense, not that the Americans are lazy, but because the Americans have a lot less time to focus on cooking because work, because of children, because of other responsibilities. Nobody wants to come home, myself included, when I was working in healthcare at 6 o'clock at night and cook a 3-hour ragu sauce, So I threw that word lazy in there, and also for the travel, because we don't do a lot of bouncing around on my tours. We're not out from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. jumping from one activity to another. We don't always go and at the crack of dawn. We experience Italy the way the Italians experience Italy. That is to say, we savor it, we enjoy it. Lazy is probably not the accurate term. More, efficient cooking, I would say. But people like the name, and people always ask, where did this come from? So that's where that came from. I was thinking of lazy in the kitchen and lazy also when we travel, not necessarily, lazy that we're on the sofa, but making both cooking and travel more efficient.
So I have thought on this that when I saw you did the naming, I bit right into it because I thought, geez, that's right up my alley. Like if someone said to me, make Italian, I would absolutely get some pasta boiling in the most American way possible. I would throw oil in a pan. I would slice some garlic into that pan, and I would start from there and start figuring out what else I'm going to do. A little bit of whatever was in the kitchen kind of a thing. This leads me to this. Am I right that your dad was like a produce merchant in Southern Italy? You mentioned that like whatever he didn't sell was what ended up on the table. How did growing up with that shape the cooking philosophy that you used in your books?
So yeah, he was a greengrocer. He had his own small shop, basically selling produce. So our entire life while we were in Calabria was centered more on produce than elaborate meals, which we were following the Mediterranean diet before we knew it was cool to follow. Excuse me, that diet. And we were eating all this organic produce again without even realizing it. So when I cook, Italians, especially Southern Italians, they don't use a lot of heavy creams. They don't use a lot of heavy butters. Well, Northerners do, but us Southerners, we focus on fruits, vegetables, legumes, greens, olive oil, meat too, of course, chicken, lamb, or pork, a lot of cheese, ricotta. So when I did the cookbooks, I kind of aimed to use a lot of those ingredients, especially the olive oil, which is fundamental in our diet and so good for you. And that's why too, when I do my cooking tours, I take the pretty much every tour I do, we visit an olive oil producer and an olive oil mill to learn about the extra virgin olive oil process and the health benefits of it.
If I understood, I also read that your tours aren't really the traditional kind of hotel hopping model there. You unpack one time, you keep the same home base for the week. Talk about that slow travel approach. Why is it so genuine to experiencing that Italian culture?
So when I created my business, I had in the customer and the client I had in mind wasn't the 25-year-old who wants to cross off things off of a list so they can post it on Instagram, right? The person I had in mind was the 50 plus traveler who doesn't want to plan their own activities, but who's passionate about food and wants to know where these Italian products come from, where the Parmigiano comes from, how is olive oil produced, how is our vegetables grown. So with that in mind, I decided to focus a lot less on art, architecture, museums. I mean, there's a place for that. Just it's not my tours. I'll be right up front and say that, and more focus on also living the Italian lifestyle, even if only for that 1 week. So we stay in one hotel. We don't jump around. We don't pack and unpack every other day, but we do still see a lot during that week because we do a lot of day trips. And also by the end of the week, my clients they'll be regulars at that coffee shop where they get their coffee or their evening aperitivo. No, they'll feel a lot more immersed, even if it's only been a week, because I feel like if you're just jumping around, you don't get to really experience the real Italy. Sure, maybe you get to see a little bit more. Maybe your Instagram is a little bit more flashy that way, but you're not really getting a feel for Italy. So I want my people to really get, quote unquote, a feel for Italy, not just to see it.
I was thinking about, as we're hearing this, I'm sure we're all kind of thinking, oh my gosh, that sounds like such a dream job. That sounds amazing. But, leading those culinary tours sounds ultimate, sounds amazing, but you're managing logistics and schedules and different personalities. What's the biggest behind the scenes challenge of running these tours that the guests will never see?
There's a lot of challenges, if I'm being honest. I am taking responsibility from anywhere from 12 to 18 people. They're paying good money to be there. They are leaving their country, flying halfway across the world to spend a week with me. So it's a lot of responsibility. I think the mature traveler will know the work that went behind it. The experienced traveler, I should say. If they've ever planned their own trips, they'll know the work that's involved. The logistics, the dietary restrictions, the 3 a.m. having to rush somebody at prompt care because they don't feel good, the transfers, the making sure that the timings work, and now more and more people are gluten-free or vegan, and making sure that everybody eats well. It's a culinary tour, so I try not to exclude anybody with dietary restrictions. So there's a lot of work. There's a lot of back work that goes in it. It takes anywhere from a couple of 100 hours plus to organize a well-efficient, well-run tour. So by the time we all get there, it makes it look seamless. It's the tip of the iceberg. All the work's underneath that you can't see. And a lot of times, people will say to me in a little bit of snarky remark, well, enjoy your vacation. Well, it's a vacation for them, not for me, because I really don't take a sigh of relief until they're gone, until they're safe, until I know that they had a good time and they enjoyed themselves. And that's when I'm like, oh, I can breathe now,
That's when you can breathe. All right, listen, I'm going to do my quick sponsor reads really fast just so I don't forget them, because I do that sometimes. We have two sponsors. Chloe Forbes Kinlan has a real good handle on Notion and how to build really simple, useful business operations for when you want to have it fit you custom and work really well for you. businessops.co/backpack, and you can get an incredible Notion starter kit from Chloe. Also, Fazia Burke. Now, Fazia is a book publicist and also has brought a lot of really wonderful people to this show. She's also been helping people understand a little bit about AI lately. So if you want to learn a little bit about that, you can go to her Substack, which is faziaburke.substack.com, and dig right on into that sort of a thing. I forgot what I was doing. Oh, yeah, there we go. Sorry, Francesca. So the other thought was that you've got these 3 cookbooks. Now, the one I have to admit, I only really know the 5-ingredient Italian cookbook. I haven't expanded beyond. But, this is for home cooks that feel intimidated by making authentic dishes. what's the number one essential or the mindset shift that they need to get into making this food?
I think with any cooking, Italian, but also other cooking, I think people have to think of the worst case scenario, right? What's the worst case scenario? You follow a recipe and it doesn't turn out. You wasted a couple of bucks on ingredients, and it's something didn't turn out the way you had planned or the way you wanted it. That's the worst that can happen with cooking. It's not a life or death decision. So I always tell people, and I hope they see that throughout my other cookbooks as well, not to be intimidated by it. It's amazing how much just some good olive oil, sauteed onion, and a good can or jar of tomato sauce, and some basil leaves will turn into a delicious meal. So not to be intimidated. And also, the 5-ingredient cookbook is my first cookbook, and it's special to me because I think sometimes Americans have this philosophy about adding a lot of ingredients to their cooking. To throw some of this, some of this, some of this, just to add more flavor, because what they're using doesn't have a lot of flavor to begin with, so it needs a lot more. But Italian cooking is pretty simplistic. If you get some good farm fresh tomatoes, some good extra virgin olive oil, a little bit of oregano and salt, and a good piece of crusty bread, you get the best appetizer that you could have. So I would encourage people to actually use less and not more in the kitchen. Use higher quality, but less ingredients.
Well, that's where I was going to go next, because I was thinking about the fact that as someone who splits time between Boston and Italy, you know how different ingredients can be across the Atlantic. So in that vein, what is like the one ingredient you find the hardest to replicate or source authentically when you're back here in the States?
More than one specific ingredient. The one product is produce. I think that the produce here in the States, unfortunately, unless now it's summertime and we have access to a lot more farms, or grow our own. But what we get at the mainstream grocery store just cannot absolutely compare to the tomatoes, the strawberries, the peaches, the vegetables that we get in Italy at summertime. That's the hardest ingredient. You can get good olive oil here from Italy. You can get good pastas, you can get good salt, but the actual fresh produce, and even I just got back from a week in Sardinia with a group, and I can't tell you how many people were crazy over the strawberries. It was like they were tasting strawberries for the very first time in their life. They probably were, because strawberries taste like strawberries, not something that's been plucked green and then left to mature in a factory and hope for the best. The produce definitely is the hardest to find here in the States, unfortunately.
Speaking of that, my dad says, I enjoy using lots of ingredients. I'll use sweet potatoes, sweet peppers, 3 different colored carrots, broccoli, frozen peas, purple onions, eggs powder, protein powder, almond creamer, crispy fried onions, and olive oil. That's his morning breakfast. That was just the laundry.
I was going to say, hopefully not all in one dish, because it's a lot of ingredients for one dish.
He makes a few things. The other thing I was going to ask you about is back to touring. Your tours seem very famous for being like curated and intimate. How do you, when you're scouting these new locations, how do you find those off the beaten path places? How do you get little grandmas to open the doors? Like, how's that work?
I have to admit, I think I do have a little bit of an upper hand by being Italian and by speaking. Usually, anytime I try to source a new vendor, I always write to them in Italian. I always go back to my roots. I always say, I'm from Italy and I bring American travelers to Italy. So I think that helps. But I think there's a lot of research that goes on. Because we're at the point where places like Tuscany and the Amalfi Coast, which I do tours there, but there it's getting more and more difficult to find authentic places that are not aimed at tourists. So I think the fact there's a lot of research, and now thankfully after 10 years of being in business, I go to repeats a lot because I've tested a lot of them out and I know how they run. So, for Amalfi, for Sicily, for Tuscany, I go back to a lot of the same people. Once I find what I like and what I know my clients like, I just go back to them. But if I'm offering a new tour, like Sardinia was new for me this year, there's just a lot of research that goes in the background, a lot of interviews, sort of like we're having, to make sure that what they offer and what I'm looking for is a good fit for my clients. Because I want to, again, travel is an investment, and I want to make sure that my clients leave wanting more. And I think I do that because my business is pretty much 70% repeats, right? About 75% repeats. So I think I do leave them wanting more.
I mean, that sounds like a high win number for me. Now, this is one of those things where I'm saying it, but I don't know it to be true for sure. There's things we know. I've not yet been to Italy. I've been around it. I've been to France and a lot of
We're
other
gonna get you
countries right
there.
handy. I'll have to. Italy's famous for having some pretty strict culinary rules, as far as I know. Don't put cheese on seafood. Never drink a cappuccino after 11. Are there any of those traditional rules that you defend, or are there any that you think are secretly fine to break?
It's hard because the cappuccinos is definitely in the Parmigiano and the seafood are definitely two of the top ones. Or the ice, and they don't really use a lot of ice. So if you're asking for a soda or water, you will not get ice in it. Um, so it's not so much that I defend them, but when travelers are traveling with me, if they crave a cappuccino at 4, I'm not going to be one going, don't do that. Because you want a cappuccino at 4, have at it. Just because an Italian wouldn't have it doesn't mean that you shouldn't. Same with the Parmigiano. I don't use it because maybe I didn't grow up with it, But I'll have a cappuccino after 11, so sue me. There's no bad time for coffee. The only time I might not have a cappuccino is right after a big meal. Because I do feel like it does sit on your stomach, and it does, and that's Italians feel like it does not, it hurts your digestion. So if you had a big meal, you don't want to end with a cup of milk and coffee. But if I'm on an empty stomach and it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I'm craving a cup of coffee, I will have that cappuccino, no problem. So nobody's going to be there. I think Italians are definitely more used to Americans and their requests. So if an American asks for a cappuccino after lunch, they may, roll their eyes a little bit. But if an Italian asks, that's when it might be like, what are you doing? But I still remember I did a tour last year on the Amalfi Coast, and we did a day trip to Capri, and it was extremely hot day, and we had lunch on the island, and it was hot and it was crowded, and we had just a beautiful seafood lunch. And then the wait staff came around. Anybody want an espresso? And half the hands went up for cappuccinos. And I'm like, I don't know them. But at the same time, I like to make my clients happy. So you want a cappuccino? Go for it.
Oh, Americans, this is why we can't have nice things. Slow travel is supposed to change the way that we live. Can you share your favorite memory of a guest who maybe started really stressed and hectic, and it's all fast and whatever, and they had that breakthrough moment when they were sitting enjoying an experience?
Yeah, I can probably share quite a few of them, actually. I think that it happens to a lot of people. I think we come from a society where it's rush, 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 one thing after the other, cross things off the list. We got to, we Americans run on a schedule because, so many of us work outside of the home. Whereas Italians don't they run to their own schedule. They will go to work and be late. They will stop midday for their lunch. They will return later in the afternoon after the sun has gone down and they've had their afternoon nap. So again, a lot of my clients, after a while, they have this mentality of by the end of the week, they're all like, slowing down a little bit, taking a sigh of relief, and appreciating more of, in Italians, we say il dolce far niente, which means just the sweetness of doing nothing. Just the sweetness of doing absolutely nothing, just going to enjoy a sunrise or a sunset or a cup of coffee at the bar, and taking those pockets during the day of just doing nothing for a few minutes. We're not good at that as Americans.
A thing that comes up a lot for people who cook a lot, and especially someone who maybe wrote a cookbook, but also, in the restaurant life as well. Every professional culinary instructor has these nights when they're just utterly exhausted and they just don't want to make anything. They're so tired. What's a lazy night at home? What's your go-to low effort comfort food meal?
Carbs. Pasta, definitely pasta. One of my cookbooks focuses specifically just on recipes using dry pasta. There is literally thousands and thousands of ways you could use pasta. And for me, if I don't feel like cooking, that's when the pasta box comes out. Even if I just have some dry pasta with zucchini, onion, and olive oil, stir fry that and throw in some pasta. If I have, a good jar of tomato sauce, not the pre-made kind, I'm talking about the sauce where you actually cook, not like the pre-made tomato sauce. But even by the time the pasta water is boiling and cooking, I will have made a nice tomato basil sauce. Um, Usually when I'm feeling lazy or when I don't feel like cooking, it all turns to the carbs because A, they're quick, and B, they're comforting.
Love it. Well, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I realized I didn't tell you how I end my show besides the ending of the show, but there's two more things to do. So one question, and I was thinking about it because you and I talked just very briefly about Instagram and how like you're working to get some attention on Instagram and all that. But on the other side of it, in the age of social media, there's so much like Instagram tourism. There's people trying to make their perfect photo for their grid aesthetics or whatever they call it. How do you guide your guests to maybe put down the phones and step a little? And I'm a photographer, so I'm saying this question thinking, how do you get them to step away from being a tourist and actually experience Italy?
Well, that's a great question. One thing I always tell them too is that I take a lot of photos myself during the tour. And I do it because obviously for marketing, and I tell them, let me be the photographer while we're here, and you spend less time on worrying about getting that perfect shot and more about being present in the moment. So I do, not everything we eat has to be photographed. Not everything that we see has to be snapped in a picture. I'll take some pictures and I'm happy to share them with you. But, put your phone down eventually at some point so you can enjoy the moment.
Love it. All right. So we're at a couple different parts of our day. We have to do the end here. And I will say, it's so funny. I'm so used to having both of us set up. So I'm always like running one little step ahead. But here's what we do next.
Oh, and here's our person of the day. Kaboom!
And I will say that Annette Mason earns our person of the day. She says it's very clear why you have 70% of your clients as returning guests and travelers, delivering a recipe to slow down constructively, enjoying life. And that you are entitled to one free apple. Just run into any old store you want, steal the apple, run out before anyone catches you, and it is yours. You're the perfect person of the day. We have one question that we ask every single guest on the show, which is what goes in your backpack. Now, this could be it's a very small answer. Like it could be something like one person said an avocado. One person said hope for the future. So Francesca Montillo, what goes in your backpack that we can add for people's success? And you're on mute.
Sorry, that would help. I would say one thing that has metaphysically always been in my backpack is optimism. I try to think, rather than the worst case scenario, try to think the best case scenario. And I find that usually reality is somewhere in between. Things don't always work out the way we hope, but things almost never work out the way we fear. So try to keep an optimistic perspective about anything, not about travel, about the future, about whatever the case may be. Try to be optimistic about the outcome.
Well, probably the best cook in my whole was my Grammy, who she was a French cook from the Canadian. So instead of we'd get all